Hello,
We are the Lazy Poets.
and we're the creators of Earthenwar.
Earthenwar is a strategy game where players use dice to magically control a golem,
It's a two-player game,
and it takes about 20 minutes to play.
and in this video, I'm going to explain the rules. So, when you set up the board, make sure that you've got one trench near your opponent and one near yourself. Then place next to the board the two control grids. Make sure that in the middle, that forwards facing arrow is facing away from you towards your opponent, and that their forwards facing arrow is pointing towards you as well. Then you want to place some dice on those grids. Grab one of the white dice with a number 1 facing upwards and place it on the moon symbol, the dark circle, the front of your grid, and do the same on your opponent's grid. Then you will need to place your golems. So you might have the wooden golems that come with the game, or you might have the limited edition ceramic golem pieces. And if you do, take a moment to enjoy the hefty weight of them as you place them onto the board, on the starting squares here and here. Then at the side of the board, you should have your dice and your damage counters ready for easy access when you start playing. Also, make sure you've got the rulebook close to hand. It's got the handy phases reminder on the back of it and really useful to refer to. So pop that there. Now, before we begin the rules proper, I just want to give you a few of the basic ideas. So in Earthenwar, what you're trying to do is to destroy your enemy golem. Now, how do you do that? Now, over time, you attack that golem, and as you do, you add damage counters to their grid. And when you've got 3 in a row, lo and behold, you are victorious. It's a bit like noughts and crosses, getting 3 in a row on the square there. Another idea of Earthenwar is that over time your piece moves around the board and attacks in different directions. And you can determine what moves and actions and attacks your golem does by the dice that are on your control grid. So over time, you add different dice to your grid and your golem gets new moves, and you get a little bit closer to having that magic 3 in a row to take out your enemy. Let's take a closer look at some examples of dice in the grid to give you a feel for how this works. Now, white dice indicate movement. White number 1 at the front of your grid means that your golem can move forward 1 square. And to do that move, you move it from the moon symbol to the sun symbol like so, and your golem makes a corresponding move. Let's suppose there was a white number 2 in this corner. You would move it from the moon to the sun, and it would move corresponding move 2 squares diagonally. Now, black dice indicate attack. Let's suppose you had a black number 1 at the front of your grid, and you wanted to attack the square in front of you. You would move it forward from the moon to the sun, and that would attack that square. And similarly, you might see where we're going with this. If you had a number 2 in this forward right square on your grid, if you moved it from the moon to the sun, it would attack the square that is forwards right of you, distance 2. Now, if there was an enemy golem in that square, it would put a damage counter in their grid, and you'd be 1 step closer towards having the magic 3 in a row, which would make you victorious. Okay, that's enough examples, but let's get into the rules of play. Now, at the start of the game, roll to see who goes first. Then, you want to work through the following 4 phases. These are refresh, improve, swap, and use. Let's take a detailed look at each of these in turn. Phase 1 is the refresh phase. This is a really quick phase. This is where you move all of your dice from the sun symbols back to the moon symbols, and this indicates that they are available to use. Note that in the very first turn of the game, you probably won't have to do this because you'll have already placed your dice on the moons. Next up is phase 2, the improve phase. Now, this phase is all about a key strategic choice you can make about how you improve the dice on your grid. You can do various things. You can choose to take a new black or white dice and roll it and put it into an empty square in your grid. You can choose to tweak or modify one of the existing dice in your grid by improving the value by 1 and upgrading it, or downgrading it by 1. Or you can choose to do nothing. So that's 5 options for you: new black dice, new white dice, improve a dice, downgrade a dice, or do nothing. So for example, in my first turn, I might roll a new black dice and place it there in my grid. Phase 3 is the swap phase, where you can swap any two adjacent dice in your grid. For example, I might swap these two. Now note that adjacent includes diagonal, so if these two were here, I could still do the swap. You can also swap a dice with an empty square by doing something like that. So the contents was empty from that square, so it just swaps over. And there you have it. That is the swap phase. There's two different types of dice, the white dice and the black dice. Let's take a look at the white dice and movement first. The number on the dice indicates the number of spaces that your golem will move. The position of the dice in your grid indicates the direction in which your golem will move. And because it's a white dice, that indicates it's a movement. So what we do is, when we're using the dice, we move it from the moon to the sun, and our golem does a corresponding move. You must move the exact number shown on your dice, and if that means that you'd move off the board or through an enemy golem, then you can't move in that way. Black dice indicate attack. The number on the dice indicates how far the attack goes, and the position of the dice inside the grid indicates the direction that that attack will go in. You can also look at these handy little arrows inside the sun if you want to check what that direction is. Now, just like the movement dice, when you're using them, you move them from the moon symbol to the sun symbol. Now, one of the differences between black and white dice is that after you use a black dice, you downgrade it by 1. That's because the attacks are a little bit like ammunition. They get spent over time, and we indicate that downgrading by just changing it from a 2 to a 1. So a 3 becomes a 2, 2 becomes a 1, and if a 1 gets spent or used, it would then be removed from the board and put back in the stock at the side. So in this example, we've just done an attack of range 2, we've downgraded it to a 1, and we need to place a damage counter on our opponent. But which square do we place the damage counter on? Well, we can figure that out by looking at what moon symbol was underneath the dice that was doing the attack. In this case, we've got a thin crescent symbol with a single dot on it. So I look at my opponent's grid, I see here there's a thin crescent symbol with a dot on it, and I take one of the damage counters and I place it in that corner. Let's look at a couple of other examples. So if I have a black 3 here and I do an attack in this direction, I would look to see what symbol was involved. So this is a thin crescent without a dot, and I would see where the equivalent square is on my opponent's grid, and I would place one of the damage counters there on that grid. Note that if there were any dice on this particular square, they could still stay on that square. Let's do another quick example. So here I have a black 1 at the front and center of my grid. I'm attacking forwards, and I'm going to land an attack on the same square in my opponent's grid. Now this is one which is the full black moon, and I place this tile here, and the dice remains in play for my opponent, and wow, look at that, I've got 3 in a row. And of course, if you get 3 in a row, you're the winner. You may be wondering, what happens if you attack a square that's already got a damage counter on it? And what you do is you actually roll 2 dice to determine a coordinate where the new damage counter will go. Now in this particular setup, I'm about to attack my opponent with a black 2. So let's go through the motions. So I would move it from the moon position to the sun, and because it's an attack dice, I would downgrade it from a 2 to a 1. Then normally I'd place a damage counter on this square on my opponent's grid, but they've already got one there. So I roll a black dice and a white dice, and this gives me some random coordinates. In this case, I've got a black 2 and a white 3. So I look at these small dots here, and I find a black 2 and a white 3, which will give us this square here. And then I place a damage counter on that square. Now, if I'd happened to have rolled a 1 and a 1, then I would be indicating this particular square, and I simply wouldn't get another damage counter on my opponent. Bad luck. And if you'd rolled a 2 and a 2, you would actually get to damage the central square in the middle of the grid. And that's the only way you can damage that particular square. Okay, so we've seen movement, we've seen attack, we've seen damage, and now let's put it all together. So in your turn, you can actually use the movements and attacks in either order, and this can build up some pretty devastating combos. And personally, this is my favourite part of the game. Let's take a look at one particularly devastating combo that we have here. So the white golem is next to the black golem, and there's a few dice here on my grid. Let's have a look at one of these moves. So I might start off by doing an attack to the side. That would damage our opponent in this particular location. That dice would then get used up. Then I might go this way and do another attack by going in this direction, which would put a damage counter on my opponent over here. That dice would get used up. And then I might want to go 2 squares this way, 1, 2, and 1 square this way, 1, and do an attack with range 3 here, 1, 2, 3, putting another damage counter in this corner over here. So you can see that although an individual move might be quite simple, you can chain together these moves to create some pretty awesome combos, and it's really satisfying when you do.
So there you have it.
And what you've heard today is only the basic version of the game.
But it also comes with additional scenarios.
Ones where you have pre-arranged dice on your grid, ones where you have shell holes as terrain on the board, and even one where you have to escort a soldier from one side to the other.
And these can all be played in different combinations, giving increased variety and replayability.
So, thank you for watching.
And have fun playing.
Bye.